Well, hey, Jason, thanks for joining us on the Be Unexpected podcast with Wyatt Spalding and Jake Burnside. Appreciate you joining us. And yeah, you just would like to share a little bit about your story or your family, where you grew up, siblings, and where you're living now.
Yeah, Jake and Wyatt, first of all, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it, guys. This will be a lot of fun to chat with you. I was a kid, the oldest of three boys. I have two younger brothers. It's weird to say younger now because they're in their 40s, just like I am. So we're all kind of the same age and
Mhm.
we're older now, but I still think of them as, those 10-year-old and those 8-year-old kids when I was 12 kind of thing. But we're all very close in age. My youngest brother is just 4 years younger than me. So three boys. Grew up in upstate New York, Albany, New York, the capital of New York State, and a little town about 10 miles south of there. And it was a small town, a couple thousand people. Everybody knew everybody. There's good and bad to that, but it was a nice town where we kind of had a lot of friends, played a lot of sports, love sports. It's in many ways that's all I cared about as a kid and even into my early 20s, and that was great. Love sports. Um, had a mom and dad who divorced when I was 5, almost 6 years old. So don't really have a lot of memories of them being together. My dad, which we may get to here and when we talk, is an alcoholic. He's been sober now for a while, but those younger years were pretty difficult with me and my brothers and the relationship that we had. It was kind of a broken relationship with my father. We were very close to my grandparents, and my grandfather, George Romano, is the greatest man I've ever known. And he helped keep us into sports and kind of take us around to all of our games and practices and did a lot of that. As we got older, I think I was so geared towards sports that's what I wanted to do. And I realized when I couldn't play professionally or even collegiately, I did play a semester of community college basketball. So that kind of counts, but it's not really college basketball, especially when I was on the bench. I played maybe 6 games my sophomore year, scored maybe 9 points total, but that's okay. I got to play college basketball, even if it was community college basketball, but I knew I wasn't going to be professional or anything like that. So the next best thing was to go and talk about sports and go into broadcasting. And that's when I had kind of in college, even in high school, began to set my dreams and desires towards that. And didn't really know how to do that other than to go to the best colleges that were close that had broadcasting programs. So I went to a 2-year community college, my first 2 years, the one I play basketball at, and they had a great broadcasting program. And then the next 2 years, when I went back to college and got my bachelor's degree, I went to a 4-year state school that was about an hour away from home that also had a really good communications and media program. So that's where my focus and my goals and my desires were. When I graduated college, I began work at a local radio station. And in that radio station, got a lot of experience that eventually led me to ESPN many moons ago, 22 years ago now, when I started working there. I don't work there anymore, but when I started working there, I was 26 and basically living the dream uh, of working in a place like ESPN. Now, at that time, I had just gotten married. I've still been married 23 years now to my wife, Dawn. We have a daughter, Sarah, one daughter who is 18 and in college. And so my wife and I are empty nesters, and we're getting used to having a little bit quieter home with our daughter away in college. And I'll be 50 years old next year. So I just turned 49, and I've been working with Sports Spectrum now, where I host a podcast and kind of lead our media team for about the last five plus years. So I love what I get to do. I love that I can tell stories now of sports, but we can intersect faith as well, which is a really important part of my life. In fact, if I tell you, it's the most important part of my life is my faith in God. So combining those two of my love of sports and my love for faith and my love for God has been a really fun thing that I've been able to do and be a part of for these past 5 years.
Wow. Being 26-year-old and working at ESPN, I can only imagine. So, Wyatt, that's like us going there right now. That would be so
Yeah,
cool.
it'd be
And
insane.
then how did what spoke to you? Like, how did God speak to you to move from the ESPN, the dream job? If you're in sports, right? That's the dream job. How did
Yeah.
you feel that prompting to leave and then actually do it?
Yeah, it was hard. It wasn't, I tell people I can look back now and it looks like the easiest decision ever. But when you're going through it and going in the midst of making a decision or even thinking about a decision like that, you don't know if it's the right decision or if it's really from God or if it's just from me. It didn't make a lot of sense initially. And it was 2 years before I actually left. I left in 2017, in February of 2017 from ESPN. It was probably somewhere in 2015 when I started thinking about what would it look like if I ever left ESPN.
Mhm.
It didn't mean necessarily that I wanted to. It's just those that kind of started creeping in a little bit. And I believe that was God, actually, the Holy Spirit kind of impressing on me that, just remember that there's more than sports. That's kind of all it was. And there's more than just, ESPN. There's me. And I want you to be doing more for me. That's kind of what I felt like I was hearing. I didn't hear a voice or anything like that. It was just kind of my, some people might call it your gut feeling,
Mhm.
So it was in 2015 when it started thinking about it. And really it was 2016 when I just began to tell some people that I was feeling this prompting to maybe think about leaving ESPN. Now, I didn't tell anybody at ESPN this, but I told friends and colleagues and people who were in this business, a lot of people who were Christians, a lot of speakers and authors, just different people, maybe 20 people or so that I just spent time talking to in 2016. And I said, listen, guys, I'm not looking for any job or anything here. I'm just asking you if I'm crazy. Am I crazy to be thinking about leaving ESPN? Because I feel like at this time of my life, it might be the right time to make this pivot if I ever do. Now, let me back up here. I loved my job at ESPN for all 17 years I was there. So I wasn't looking to leave per se, which is why I believe this was from God. And I can definitely look back at now and say it was, because from a earthly perspective, from a worldly perspective, from a sports fandom perspective, like all three of us are, it doesn't make sense. Why would you want to leave ESPN? Like, why would you want to leave a place like that and go work somewhere else, or even just leave without a job? And that's why I wasn't wanting to leave. I just felt like God was saying, I want you to do more for me. And I didn't know what that meant. I didn't even know if that meant leaving ESPN, but I, at least as I was growing in my faith, and at the time that it was going on, I was 42-ish, 42, 41. And I started thinking about, okay, is this the time in my life, kind of half time of life, right? If you live to
Mhm.
be 85, which most people, I think the average age of life is 80. So if you get to 85, you're 42 is about halfway in
Mhm.
life. Is this the time to make a pivot? Is this the time to begin a new game plan, if you will, for the second half of life? And I had no idea that that was going to transpire in the way that it has over these past 5 years. But somewhere around 2016, I had a call with a guy named Steve Stenstrom, and he is a former NFL quarterback with the Chicago Bears and San Francisco 49ers, played college ball at Stanford, and he's also the president of Pro Athletes Outreach and Sports Spectrum. He's my boss now. And so Steve and I just
Wow.
talked. Yeah, it's crazy. And Steve and I just talked and got to know each other. And I'll never forget the first time I talked to him, I didn't ask him for a job at all. All I said was, I love Jesus and I love sports. And that's what you guys are doing. I said, so I'd love to hear more about it. And then we just continued a conversation. And as he started hinting to me that opportunities could be open if I was open to it in terms of going to work for him, at the same time, I knew God was saying, okay, remember what I told you? I want you to do more for me. And I could just sense this was the direction that God was nudging me towards. Now, I say this with all truth and humility. I had no idea if it was honestly, truly from God. I thought it was, but you never know until you take that step. And so, after a lot of prayer, a lot of conversations with my wife, the offer came to me to go work for Sports Spectrum. Now, guys, different stages of life that we're in that I'm talking to you, but imagine that you're making pretty good money and then somebody says, okay, we got a great opportunity for you here at Sports Spectrum, right? But it's 40% less pay. 40% less. That's a lot of money. There's no benefits, there's no health benefits. It's just a contract position. but we'd love to have you come on board. Does not sound like that's from God, and does not sound like that is the right move. Correct? In fact, when I went to my wife and I said this, she looked at me and thought I was nuts. She's like, no, why would we do this? So after praying, and I still felt peace about this move, I said to her, I said, all right, here's the deal. The money that they're offering, we've lived on this money before. It's not what I'm making now, but we've lived on this kind of a salary before. I said, I believe this is from God. And if it is from God, I want to be obedient to him, not to man, not to the world, to him. I said, so I feel like this is the right move. Now, if it's not from God, if it's not the right move, it'll blow up in my face very quickly. It'll fall flat. If it is the right move, God will see us through. He'll make a way, and the door will continue to stay open for me to walk through. And that's all I did. I don't want to say I tested God, because that's not the right word, but he does say, put me to the test and watch what I'll do.
Right.
It was just kind of trusting and believing that it really was from him. And now 5.5 years later, I'm still with Sports Spectrum. And so we made the decision. It wasn't easy, but February 10th, 2017, that was my last day at ESPN. I was working on Mike and Mike in the Morning, a show that used to be on the air for many years there. And they said goodbye to me on air, which was a really nice thing that they did. I walked out of the building about an hour later, and I think I've been back one time, and I still live here in Connecticut. I'm not far from the offices, maybe 15 minutes, but I've been back one time in 2018, and I haven't been back since. And it's not that I'm trying to avoid going back. I just have no reason to go back.
Yeah.
But it's been a great move, and God's opened up more doors than I ever thought by being able to do podcasts like this with you guys, Jake and Wyatt, and be able to write 2 books and speak and go across the country to different places and share my story. That's way beyond anything I ever thought would happen. I just thought maybe I'll do a cool sports and faith podcast and go work for Sports Spectrum, but this has turned into much more than that.
Yeah. Wyatt, I know that both you and I probably had the same question. Do you still have a Jason relationship with those ESPN workers, like the hosts or any of those leadership role kind of guys?
Oh yeah. Not close friendships, I would say, with most people, but cordial friendships, and certainly social media, Twitter and Instagram helps me keep tabs on everybody that I used to work with, and they keep tabs on everything I'm doing. So that helps, and we stay in touch, and I'm usually commenting or liking when any of my former colleagues are doing something really well. I've been able to stay in touch with and close to a few people for sure. There's a couple producers, some former people that aren't there anymore who I've been really close with. A few on-air people that I'm still pretty close with. A guy like Dan Orlovsky is a good buddy of mine, and
love listening to Dan.
Actually, Dan wasn't at ESPN when I was there. When I left, he was still playing. But we met at a couple different functions and have become good friends, and so we've stayed close. And there's a few other people that I would say that I have good relationships with. I try not to have any bad relationships, right? You don't want to burn any bridges. That's why I always talk very highly about my time at ESPN. There's always things going on behind the scenes that aren't the best, or tough moments that you might have gone through, or tough people that you worked with, or bosses. But I'm not here ever to bash anybody. I mean, my time there was an amazing blessing, and I could not and would not change it for the world. A lot of the opportunities that I have now is only because of having worked there. In fact, that might be the only reason why we're talking. And I'm not saying that in a bad way. I'm just saying I get that there is something about having worked for 17 years at the biggest sports media company in the world. I get that. So I'm grateful for that. And yes, I have maintained a lot of relationships, and many of those people have been on my podcast now, Sports Spectrum. So that's been nice to kind of maintain connections. I mean, when I wrote my second book, which was stories from my time at ESPN, I released it in 2020. It was really fun to revisit and rekindle some of those relationships during my time at ESPN as I wrote the book. And I wanted to make sure everybody that was mentioned in the book and the stories were all approved by those people. So I got to talk to people like Trey Wingo again and Bob Lee and get connected with them and just let them know I appreciated what they had done for me during my time at ESPN.
Yeah, that's really awesome. Wyatt had asked me about what you do with Sports Spectrum and who you interview. And the other day he's like, send me some of his people he's recorded. And I just scrolled through. I was like, here's Bryce Young, here's some of the coach, here's Tony Dungy, go look at this. So how does that work? Wyatt and I were both kind of wondering, how does that work when do you just reach out to whether they have a relationship with Christ in sports and you just bring them on, or how does that work?
Well, we always, at least we've done over 1,000 interviews at Sports Spectrum now, which is crazy, in 5 years. Pretty much every single one of them, I can only think of one, and I'll tell you the one in a second, but pretty much every single interview that we've had, every conversation has been with somebody who I know is a follower of Christ and somehow connected to the sports world, even if they're just a sports fan, and they're a pastor of a church, and obviously they're a follower of Christ if they're pastoring a church. I'll talk to that person. So finding those people hasn't always been easy. A lot of the people that we've talked to comes from referrals from other people. A lot of them have been the relationships that I've made with different people, both from ESPN and even since leaving ESPN. And I've been thankful to be able to build a lot of relationships up with athletes since I left ESPN and coaches. And then there's like the Tony Dungy interview. I've known Tony for 10 years, and he was at a conference that he kind of leads at in Minneapolis, and the people who run that conference asked me to speak at it as well. So Tony and I were there, and I said, can I get 15 minutes extra with Tony and talk to Coach Dungy about Jesus and just life? And so that's where that interview came from. I've had Coach on the phone as well for a podcast probably 4 years ago and got to talk to him then. Bryce Young, I have zero relationship with Bryce Young.
Yeah.
All I did was reach out to Alabama.
Oh, that's cool.
And ask,
that's awesome.
Which is very rare that they would say yes to somebody like us, because we are a very small ministry in the media space. We're not ESPN. But I think because I had connected with Bryce Young's dad, who loves Jesus and loves the gospel, I think when Bryce Young's father saw what we were about, I think that helped us be able to get his son for an interview. So that's kind of how those interviews come up and how they come together. The one interview that I did that was not with, at least as far as I know, with somebody who is a fully committed follower of Christ, was Bruce Pearl, the coach at Auburn, the head coach, the basketball coach there.
Right.
Wow.
But here's how that came about. So I had looked up Bruce Pearl and saw that he was Jewish. I'm like, okay, that's great. You're Jewish. No problem. I didn't think it would be a fit for our show, because if you're Jewish, you're probably not a follower of Christ. And again, there's no judgment here. It's just not a fit for our show. But then I started watching the Final Four that year. And I don't know if you guys remember that. I think it was 2018 or 2019.
Yes.
That was the Final Four where Auburn got kind of hosed in that game against Virginia.
Yeah, there was that foul at the end.
And I saw him in the Elite Eight in Kansas City. I went and saw that. And
there you go.
Yeah.
But if you watch Bruce Pearl after his interviews, he was talking about being so thankful to God and giving all glory to God. Like, he was speaking in ways that made me think this is more than just somebody who's a Jewish man. This feels like a guy who's following the Lord now, just in his responses. So somehow I got connected to a pastor and the chaplain of Auburn. And we were just talking, and I said, can you tell me more about Bruce Pearl? Is he a Christian? And he's like, he's seeking, he's searching, but he's close. That's what his words were. And I said, well, he's Jewish, right? He's like, yes, he's very connected to his Jewish heritage. He's proud to be Jewish. I said, that's great. He goes, but I think he sees that Jesus is real. And I'm like, okay. He's like, do you think he'd be a fit on your show? And I said, well, I'd love to talk to Bruce Pearl, but is he going to mind me asking him about Jesus? And he goes, no, I don't think he would mind at all. And so we had him on. We talked to him for 30 minutes, and he was great. I think he was honest and open about the fact that he was at that time, I don't know where he is now, so this is 3 years ago, but he was seeking and searching and really trying to marry, I think, both his Jewish heritage and this newfound faith that he was seeking out with Christ. It was really fascinating to talk to. A side note, he kept calling me James the entire interview.
That's funny.
And I didn't know how to correct him. What do you do when somebody calls you the wrong name? Do you correct them right away and say, actually, I'm Jason? I'm Jason, Bruce. But I didn't. And he just kept calling me James. There was a couple times where I did this. I go, Bruce Pearl is joining us here on Sports Spectrum. I am Jason Romano. Coach, let me ask you this question. I just did that little reset where I mentioned my name and he still kept calling me James. So if you go back and listen to that interview, it was awesome. But you're probably wondering, why is Coach Pearl calling me James? Nothing personal. It was just what he thought my name was, I guess.
Yeah, just roll with it.
Just roll with it. I don't care. He can call me anything he wants as long as he wants to come on our show. So.
Do you think he knows your name today? Or?
I don't know. I think if I reached out to him, he might think I'm James Romano. I don't know. Maybe.
Yeah.
It'd be fascinating to revisit that. I would like to have him back on at some point. I would say in the next year, just to see where he is. But yeah, that's that's the only one that stands out of anybody that I think we've talked to that I don't believe, at least going in, I knew that they had a faith in Christ.
Yeah. That's really cool how all these people with Christ and sports come together and you just reach out to them and get to know them. It's building a relationship with them. And it sounds like with the one with Bryce Young, does Bryce Young's dad, was he was he in the NFL?
No, I think he was just, when Bryce won the Heisman Trophy.
Okay.
I think our Sports Spectrum team started thinking about, we'd love to do a story on Bryce, but I'm not sure quite how we can do that. And then I just searched on social media and I found his dad. And I said, well, let me introduce myself in a way that's not like going to scare him away. Right. So I just said, hey, I'm Jason. We do a sports and faith talk show. I used to work at ESPN. Sometimes you have to
plug that in
ESPN line so he could take me seriously and understand my credibility. And then we did an interview with Bryce's dad. His name is Craig Young. We did an interview with him on one of our other podcasts with Sports Spectrum called Transformed. And I think doing that and him seeing how we do things at Sports Spectrum at least gave us the opportunity for him to then believe that if we wanted to talk to his son, he could help facilitate it. Now, he didn't just call Bryce and say, hey, Bryce, do this interview. And Bryce came on. He just said he would put in a good word with Alabama and tried his best to let them know that, we were interested in an interview. And for a while, I didn't think it was going to happen. And then right about the second week of August, about a week before we went to deadline for our magazine, which is the one behind me with Demario Davis, when we went to deadline with that, Alabama called back and said, we have 15 minutes with Bryce on this day at this time. Are you available? I was like, yep, we'll figure it out. And Bryce came on and he was very hoarse. He had he had been screaming, I'm guessing, in practice. And so that voice was a little rough, but he was great and very calm and I think humble and quiet almost. You have to pull it out of him a little bit. But so glad that we got to talk to the Heisman Trophy winner. I mean, that's kind of a big deal.
Yeah, it's 15-minute time frame. Like, shoot, we'll grab it. Exactly.
Yeah, we usually do 30 minutes, but if he had told me 5 minutes, I would have said yes. Like, you do what you can do with it.
Right.
And you do the best you can.
Right. Wyatt, I know you had some questions for Jason about maybe his first start at ESPN. If you want to ask a few of those.
Yeah. So, Jason, your first day at ESPN, like, what were all the emotions you were feeling? I mean, that had to be it's like getting called up to the majors or something.
Yes, this is a great question because I don't talk about this too often because you're not asked it. But the first day at ESPN, I can tell you the date. It was July 18th, 2000. So you guys were probably like 5 at that time, but whatever. Make me feel old, guys. Make me feel old. But it was July 18th, 2000. I had just spent 3 years working in local radio, producing shows. Loved my time there. But I really did feel like that. Guys, when I was going to ESPN, I felt like I was being called up to the big leagues and it almost felt surreal. Like this is really happening. Not only am I going to work at the worldwide leader in sports and they're paying me to work there, but they're going to pay me to watch sports. And I didn't know exactly what I was getting into as far as a job yet. That first day you're doing some onboarding and you're just trying to learn about the lay of the land. And they're kind of telling you this is, introducing you to a bunch of people. And this is kind of the job that you'll probably be doing, which was producer. And I was on ESPN radio when I got there. So it was the National Radio Network, but it was still at ESPN in Bristol, Connecticut at the big campus. And so it was really exciting. But here's a funny story behind this. So night before, I was in Albany. My wife was still in Albany, and I packed my clothes, and I just packed about a week's worth of clothes. And then I drove out here. It's about a 2-hour drive from Albany to Bristol, Connecticut. And they had put me up in a hotel type of place. It was more of like a condo than a hotel, but they put me up in this place for about 3 weeks. They said, we will give you this place for 3 weeks so you can stay, and then you're out. Then you have to find your own place. And so there was some pressure to find an apartment to live in and all that, which thankfully we were able to do. But I had packed my clothes. I go out to this place. I'm kind of settled into this like studio apartment condo type thing. I go to, and I'm one of those guys still to this day where I like to lay out my clothes the night before. Like, what am I wearing? Just less to think about when I wake up, right?
Yep.
Definitely.
What am I wearing? I don't do that every day, especially during the weekdays. I still do that.
Mm.
And I went to lay out my clothes, and I realized I had forgotten any kind of dress clothes to bring with me. So all I had were jeans and golf shirts, collar shirts, short sleeves, and my sneakers. And the first day I really wanted to wear, I don't know if I wanted to wear a tie, but I wanted to wear like a nice collared dress shirt, you know, some slacks or some khakis and shoes. Like, I wanted to make a good impression on the first day. Well, I had forgotten those clothes at home, and it was too late to get them. So I went in my first day with jeans, a pair of Nikes, and a golf shirt. And I kept apologizing to every single person I ran into. I'm so sorry I'm dressed like this. This is all I have. I left my clothes at home. And the funny thing about that is, first of all, everybody was really nice. But as I'm going around and meeting the different people, that's the attire that everybody was wearing. Jeans, golf shirt, and sneakers. And so I kind of fit in pretty well. But I really was, and I'm glad I fit in, because that would have been even more embarrassing. But when you're trying to make that first impression on your first day, you want to come, you know, dressed to impress. And I just forgot my clothes at home. So
Wow.
I'll never forget that first day too, and going through, you know, wearing what I was wearing, but going through the different areas. And I had already gone on a tour of ESPN previously, but just seeing like Dan Patrick and Bob Lee and Stuart Scott, the late Stuart Scott, and at the time Keith Olbermann and Rich Eisen, and all of these amazing people who were working at ESPN at the time, Trey Wingo. I was seeing these people, and I'm like, these people are my colleagues now.
Yeah.
And I've talked to minor league baseball players who got called up, and I can't remember who it was, but somebody got called up, and suddenly there's, you know, Albert Pujols in the dugout next to them, or, you know, one of those legendary players, and they're like, that guy's my teammate now.
Yeah.
And I could relate to that. Like, that's kind of how I felt when I'm seeing Dan Patrick and realizing this is the guy when I was 19 or 20 years old that I would watch every single night on SportsCenter. And I would watch Chris Berman every Sunday on NFL Countdown and NFL Primetime. And now I'm working with these guys. And I was kind of not really working closely with them. I just meant that we were both working at ESPN. But as I went through my 17 years, I worked with Trey Wingo, and I worked with Chris Berman, and I worked with Stuart Scott, and I worked with Bob Lee. Like, these were people that I worked with, and Skip Bayless, every single day. So it was fascinating to watch how the career blossomed and grew. But that first day was kind of like you're walking into the candy store and you got free pickings, and your eyes just go like this, and huge. You feel like you're you know, having the greatest experience of your life.
Wow. It's like, oh, I can't go take pictures with them. I'm autographs. I'm their coworker. So
right. And I didn't do that. Except when occasionally those athletes or celebrities would come to ESPN.
Right.
Which 9 years later, that was my full-time job. I was a talent booker and talent producer. And when I did that, I got to meet, and that's how I really built relationships with a lot of the people in the sports industry. But occasionally those people were my heroes, and they would come to ESPN, and I got to meet Tony Dorsett and Emmett Smith and Darryl Strawberry and all of these heroes of mine when I was a little kid that now were coming to ESPN to do, you know, interviews on all of our shows. And I was the producer for them and walking them around and showing them around. So yeah, it was crazy. It really was. And to say that I got to meet, not everybody gets to meet their heroes. It just doesn't happen that often. And I got to meet not every one of my heroes, but quite a few. And I'm so grateful for that.
That's so cool, because like you said, you don't get to meet your heroes, and So when you do try to be cool, but it's like, oh my gosh.
So let me tell you a story. Darryl
Please.
Strawberry, my favorite
Yeah.
baseball player when I was 10 years old, and into my teen years, loved that guy. He left the Mets in 1991, and I was devastated that he went to the Dodgers. And I'm a Mets fan and been a Mets fan since the early to mid 80s. But Darryl was my baseball hero. Like, I had notebooks with his stats and collected all of his cards and had posters on the wall, and just my guy, right? And I didn't think anything of it. And suddenly you fast forward in 2009, Darryl Strawberry is coming to ESPN and I'm his producer.
Oh,
Right?
Oh,
I'm
man.
going to be the guy that's
Whoa.
going to spend the entire day with my childhood hero. And I'm super nervous and I'm trying to play it cool, right? You guys just said, like, play it cool. I'm trying not to be like, can you take a picture with me? Can I get your autograph? I didn't want any of that. I was there to do a job. So I had to be cool and professional about it. I don't even think I told him I was a Mets fan. I just wanted to be a professional as best I could and be his producer that day. And somewhere around 2 hours in, we end up in the cafeteria and we're just sitting down waiting before we do the next interview, and we're talking. And all of a sudden, Darryl starts asking me about me. So I told him about my relationship with the Lord, because Darryl is a Christian as well. I told him about the broken relationship I had with my dad. Darryl had a broken relationship with his dad. Also had broken relationships with his own kids because Darryl struggled with substance abuse as well. So suddenly I'm having these deep conversations with my baseball hero, and I still hadn't told him that he's my baseball hero. But we're talking about things that have nothing to do with the Mets or the World Series or baseball or Shea Stadium or any of these things. It's all about God and faith and even forgiveness and, parenting and fatherhood. It was fascinating. And that's how we became friends. Now, eventually I did tell him, hey, just so you know, you're my hero. He's like, what are you talking about? Like, if you met me when I was 9 years old, I had your jersey, I had your poster, I had your baseball cards. I said, I have a baseball that my mom got me for Christmas in 1988, and it's signed by you. I still have that baseball right behind me. I said, it's signed by you. So I'm hanging out with you now in 2009. This is kind of a big deal. Now, this was much later. This was probably the end of the day. And he goes, Jace, I appreciate that. That's amazing. First of all, calling me Jace makes me my heart melt, because nobody calls me Jace except like my family or close friends, and suddenly we're buddies. But he's like, Jace, listen, I love that you loved the Mets and you loved me and you were a fan of me. He's like, but I love you because of what you're doing in terms of who you are and what you're doing for God. I'm going to be praying for you with your dad. And I said, that's it. And he gave me his number and we became friends. Wow. Now, imagine not only meeting your hero, becoming friends with your hero.
Dang.
So that friendship has stayed till this day. We're still friends. He wrote the foreword and the introduction to my first book. Imagine his name and your name being on the cover of your book. That's insane. It's crazy.
Wow.
Live to Forgive. You read it.
Yeah.
That book is, the foreword is written and his name is right on the top by Darryl Strawberry. So you can kind of see, this is not me. I didn't do any of this. This is all God in my eyes, because nobody has the life that I can live the way I've lived it and does this intentionally. I've made a lot of, I think, smart decisions and choices along the way, hopefully with God's guidance. But this is just not me. I mean, if it were up to me, I would have gone and played, professional baseball and become a baseball player or a basketball player when I was a kid, and probably just never even had a relationship with God or cared about faith. Now I'm becoming friends with my hero, but not because of baseball. And that was what's crazy. It took me 2 years until I was with Darryl again, when I finally said, I've always wanted to ask you about the World Series in 1986, but I never wanted to. He's like, Jason, just ask it. Just ask it. I'm like, all right. When you were up at the bat in 1980, and I have this like photographic memory, against the Red Sox in 86, and you hit that home run, you had the longest home run try in the history of baseball. It was like 30 seconds that you literally kind of walked around the bases. I said, what was going on there? And he answers. And finally, I got my opportunity to talk baseball with my hero. But I'm so glad that we didn't talk baseball that first time. It was all faith, fatherhood, really important family, really important stuff. And that's how I became friends with my hero. It's crazy.
Yeah. Wow. That really just changes it when a guy like that takes a deep, genuine interest in you. And it's not just, oh, sports, blah, blah, blah. He's asking about your relationship with Christ, your family,
And
everything.
why me, by the way?
Right.
That's what I've
Yeah.
told him this a couple times. Like, why do you care about? I'm just some dude who loves sports, grew up in a small town and 2 hours north of New York City. And I happen to work, at a pretty cool place. But why in the world? He's like, Jason, once you told me about your walk with Christ, you became my brother.
Mm.
And I'm called and commanded to love you. And I was like, oh, okay.
Oh,
But I still kind of shake my head. Like, why
yeah.
me? Who am I? I'm just a guy. I really
Yeah.
believe that. I'm not anybody special at all.
Yeah.
And so for him to even take a liking or an interest to me is just, to this day, I still smile when I tell it, because it becomes a little repetitive because I've shared it a few times, but it doesn't get old because it's your hero.
Yeah.
And, my daughter got to meet him a couple times, and my daughter is a Mets fan. It's the only place I think I failed as a dad, was my daughter following in my footsteps as a Mets fan, because she's going to suffer just as much as I've suffered for 36 years.
Yeah.
But maybe not this year. We'll see.
Mhm.
But the fact that she loves the Mets, obviously it warms my heart. But then she got to meet Daryl, and she didn't know Daryl like I did, like this monumental baseball player from the 80s who was 8-time All-Star and just home run leader and all these things.
Mhm.
And she got to meet him, and he was so nice to her. And so she now tells her friends, hey, you know who Daryl Strawberry is? And she's 18. And all her friends were like, no, who's that? I'm like, oh,
Come
I don't know who
on.
Daryl Strawberry is. But she's got to meet him too. And I think that's been a fun part of this too, is like my wife and daughter have gotten to meet Daryl and gotten to know him. And yeah, it's just beyond comprehension. It's
Yeah.
mind blowing to me.
That's awesome. I have the picture of with Eric Crouch, who won the Heisman in 2001.
I met Eric once. Yeah.
Really?
Mhm.
Yeah. Awesome.
Nice.
Now he's running recreation director in Elkhorn, Nebraska. But anyhow, I remember meeting him at Walmart, and he signed that. And specifically, I'm pretty sure he called me, hey, Little Burnside. My last name is Burnside. It's Little Burnside. And then I met him again. And I don't know if you remember, but it seemed like he did. And I was 6 years old. And I just thought it was the coolest thing that he said my name. Burnside is the last name.
Mm-hmm.
And why I'm sure with you, with the stuff you did at the NBA event a couple of years ago, the All-Star game.
Yeah.
Hey,
So
you got to meet a lot of cool people.
Yeah, I want to hear about that. Tell me,
yes.
Wyatt.
So I got to go to Chicago, and this is like a month before COVID took off, and I got to go to Chicago for the All-Star game, and I played in the Special Olympic NBA Cares All-Star game. It was
Wow.
like a bunch of 12. It was 6 athletes around the world get invited, or just 12, something like that. And so the first thing I do, we all walk into this locker room, which is kind of like a backroom closet. I wouldn't call it a locker room, but we walk in, and Makemba Mutombo is one of the players. So we all just go look at his shoes. It's like a size 22 or whatever.
He's 7 feet tall, right?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
know. It's just like, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
And my favorite part was we're warming up, and before they told us don't bother the athletes and all that, it's like, well, screw it. I'm gonna go meet them. Like, you never get a chance to meet them. And so I go up to Muggsy Bogues. I love Muggsy. He's like my height, and he
I was
plays.
going to
in the
say, you're probably
NBA.
taller than Muggsy. He's only 5'3".
Yeah, I don't know. I think I was an inch taller. But I go up to him, and I'm talking to him, and one of the WNBA players that we played with, she said, you gonna guard him? I was like, yeah, I'm gonna guard him. He's the only guy my size. And I wanted to take a picture with him, but I got something better. During the game, I was playing against him, and one time I spun past him. I missed a shot. My brother said if I would have made the shot, the place would have gone crazy.
Yeah.
But then the next time I get the ball, I try to spin past him again, but my foot got caught. I tripped over him.
Yeah.
And so I had a cut from it. So for a month I had a cut on my knee. I was like, yeah, I got tripped by Muggsy Bogues, and it was awesome, man.
Yes, that is awesome. Such a cool experience.
Yeah.
But then the first thing I did when we got in the locker room is I sat next to Horace Grant, and I was like, what's Michael like? So Michael and
Absolutely.
Shaq
So
and-
you know who these guys are, which is good, because those guys
Yeah.
are playing from the 90s, and you're 26, so you were born
Yeah.
probably in the mid 90s, right? So
Yeah, I was born in 95, but I don't know how people don't know who Daryl Strawberry is, and Horace Grant.
If
Like,
you're a
watch,
sports fan, you
yeah,
probably
watch
know
these,
who these people are.
yeah, watch these documentaries, man. Like, they come out all the time, and I'm all about like knowing sports history. But
Yes. Well, that's good. That's, you guys are talking my language now. But heck yeah, if you're sitting next to Horace Grant or even Muggsy Bogues, who played with Alonzo Mourning on those Charlotte teams and was really good, that's a cool experience. Or Dikembe Mutombo, you had to go like this to Dikembe Mutombo.
yeah, I
Did you want it?
No, because I was
Ah.
like, but someone's like, oh, our coach is like, don't drive on Mutombo because he'll still swat you. I was like, yeah, that would be awesome.
I want to be swatted by Mutombo
Yeah.
and have him look at me and put the finger up and say, no, 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 no.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a cool experience,
Yeah.
man. That's awesome.
Thanks.
Not everybody gets to do stuff like that. And so even like you meeting Eric Crouch, Jake, is Eric Crouch. I think, I had those moments when I was a kid too. I got to meet a legendary baseball player named Bob Feller. I don't know if you guys have heard of that name, but he pitched in the 40s. That's how long ago he goes.
Wow.
To early, I think 30s and 40s. And he's in the Hall of Fame. When I met him, he was probably in his 70s. I met him at a minor league baseball game in Albany when I was like 12. And my grandfather was like, do you know who that is? And I said, no, Pa, who is that? He goes, that's Bob Feller, Rapid Robert Feller. I'm like, help me out. He goes, Hall of Famer, legend, Cleveland Indians legend. He went into the Hall of Fame. He actually went into service for 4 years and fought in World War II and then came back and pitched and was winning Cy Young awards. And I was like, oh, he's pretty good. He's like, yeah, go over there. So he signed my program. I think I had an Albany Colony Yankees minor league baseball program at 12 years old. He signed it and I had it for years. I don't know where it is now. I must have got rid of it in some moves, but I still remember that. Bob Feller. I still remember Robin Roberts, who's not the Robin Roberts you would see on TV, but there was a baseball player who's in the Hall of Fame who pitched with the Phillies named Robin Roberts. Met him. And so because my grandfather is pointing these people out, I'm getting autographs and, it didn't change my life or anything, but it was still such a cool thing when you're a kid to meet somebody famous. And so then when you go and work at ESPN, you're walking around with famous people every day. I'll never forget LeBron James being at ESPN.
Oh my goodness.
I didn't meet him, but I walked right by him. You guys remember the commercial he did with SportsCenter when he was sitting in like the King's throne chair?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
So he's sitting in this throne chair wearing his Cleveland, Cavaliers jersey, and Scott Van Pelt's next to him sitting in a regular chair. And ESPN sends films crews to Bristol, Connecticut when they shoot these commercials. So they're right on campus where I'm working. And I just kind of walked through. I think I was going to the cafeteria one day and walked through the hall, and I walked and I kind of looked over as I was walking. I'm like, did I just see what I think I saw? So I backed up, I looked. Well, that's LeBron James. And this is probably like 2008, right? So this is early on in his career. And I'm like, okay, not only is that LeBron James, he's wearing his uniform. And that stands out because we're not all wearing uniforms at ESPN.
Yeah.
He was shooting the commercial, the This Is SportsCenter commercial with Scott Van Pelt. And so every so often you'll walk around campus and you'll just randomly see people. Peyton Manning was standing in line right behind me or right in front of me in the cafeteria one day when I was waiting to get a sandwich for lunch. And somebody's like, you realize who's in front of you? And I looked and I go, he's a pretty tall guy. He's like, that's Peyton Manning. Why is Peyton Manning standing in line at the ESPN cafeteria? I don't get this. He was hungry, number one. But number two, he was in town filming that commercial that he did. I don't know if you remember it, with his brother, with Eli, when he kind of kicks Eli in the butt and his dad's looking at him when they're walking through and getting
Oh,
a tour.
yes.
Remember that commercial?
That
was great.
It's on YouTube, so you can go back and watch it. But that day, Peyton ended up standing in the line in the cafeteria waiting for a sandwich, and he was right in front of me. And I thought I was being played. Like, what's going on? What's Peyton Manning doing? He was just hungry, and he went to the cafeteria and got a sandwich.
Yeah.
So you just never know who you'll run into.
Seriously, so many awesome people that you just bumped into. Look, hey, it's LeBron. Oh, it's Peyton Manning. It's so cool. That's so cool.
Yep.
Yeah.
It was a fun job.
One more kind of question for you. If you would like to share a little bit about your book, specifically Live to Forgive, and then you can go to Uniform of Leadership. But just to get to a little bit of your story about your father and growing up and dive into that a little bit.
Yeah, I won't go too long because we could be another couple hours on that book. But as I mentioned earlier, I grew up with a dad who was an alcoholic. My dad also loves sports. And I say loves as in like present tense as well as past tense. Like he is a guy who was the biggest sports fan I knew when I was growing up. He's the reason, along with my grandfather, that I even started liking sports. And to this day, when I have conversations with him, all he wants to talk about is sports. And he's 71 years old. So that's all he wants to talk about still, which is great. That's how we connect. That's how we have a good relationship now. But for many years, it wasn't the best relationship. He couldn't stop drinking. And that just led to a lot of abuse, not physical, but verbal abuse. And sometimes that can be even harder. Words that should never be said from a father to a son, that type of thing. He went through 2 marriages, all because of his alcoholism. He had a job, a great job as a high school teacher and driver's ed teacher and coach. And he lost that because of his alcohol addiction, and just really spiraled downward a lot. It was probably 30 years of a broken relationship that I had with him. Just seeing him in states that a child shouldn't see their dad. And I say child as in like when I was 10 or 11, I was seeing him drunk. When I was 20, I was seeing him drunk. When I was in my 30s, I was seeing and talking to him when he was drunk. So it was just not good. Thankfully, I had a mom who loved us and kind of kept us on the straight and narrow and allowed us to go and achieve our dreams and go after, things like working at ESPN. So she really kept us on the straight and narrow to the point where we could have easily veered off and went down a really bad path ourselves. My mom saved us in many ways. But my dad was always in the picture. In 2006, my dad got behind the wheel, drove his car and hit someone else. Nobody got hurt, thankfully, but it was an accident. He was drunk. He got a DWI. He got arrested and he went to jail. Lost his license. Still does not have his license to this day because of that. So my dad made a lot of tough choices in his life that have had a lot of consequences. Some of those consequences led to the fact that me and my 2 younger brothers just didn't want to have a relationship with him anymore. And that crushed him. And I get it. It should crush him because he's a dad with 3 boys. But we had to make decisions that were best for us. Personally, for me, my dad was not at my high school graduation. He wasn't at my college graduation. He wasn't at my wedding. And he wasn't there when my daughter was born. He was either drunk or in rehabs or just trying to figure life out. And so that's kind of the relationship that we had. I still loved my dad, but I didn't like him. In fact, I would say there were many times when I would tell you I hated my father, even though I could love him at the same time, if that makes sense, just because he's my dad. So thankfully, fast forwarding in 2013, my dad reached the end of his rope, didn't want to live anymore, tried to end his life, was unsuccessful, thankfully. He took a lot of pills and tried to end his life. But it was at that moment, guys, and I had wrestled with this for a long time. I had held on to a lot of bitterness and anger towards my father, a lot. And after seeing my father almost end his life, I finally had empathy for him. I finally saw him as the same way God sees him, which is as a human being, a child of God who loves, his son. He loves his creation. And so God loved my dad, and I loved him too. And I finally saw my dad for who he was, or who God sees him at. And I was able to finally forgive him. I had a lot of unforgiveness in my system for many years. I did not want to let go. I did not want to move forward. I did not want him to forget the damage that he had caused. And really, when I'm holding on to bitterness and anger, it's doing more damage to me than it is to him. And so finally being able to forgive him was a big deal for me. And it wasn't just a one-day event. It's a gradual process that's really still continuing to this day. And this is almost 10 years now that he's, gone through that difficult time. Thankfully, my dad is sober. He was able to get sober. And by the grace of God, he is still alive today. Like I told you, still wants to talk about his St. Louis Cardinals or his New York Giants or his Boston Celtics. Those are his 3 teams. He lives and dies by those teams. The only team that I like out of those 3 are the Celtics. So we've come to an agreement there.
Wyatt.
And we'll talk a lot about the Boston Celtics. I see your Kevin
team.
Garnett poster, Wyatt. So I'm a Celtics fan, been a Celtics fan since the early 80s. Larry Bird is my hero. Have not met him, by the way.
Ooh,
Hopefully
gotta
someday.
get that done.
Someday, yeah. I got to get to
Yeah,
one
come
of the
on.
games that he's at. I got to show up in French Lick,
Yeah.
Indiana, and suddenly there's Larry Bird there. But not stalk him or anything. But my dad, I think in learning to forgive him, I learned a lot about forgiveness. A couple of years later, I spoke at my church about forgiveness and shared this story, and that led to this process that I won't get into, but it led to me writing a book about forgiveness and telling the story of my dad and learning to forgive him.
Mhm.
I did not ever want to tell that story publicly in the way I have done. I didn't ever want to write a book. I was a producer. I was a sports guy. Like, why would I want to write books? But I just saw that a bunch of people said, listen, if you write this book, it can help a lot of people, because a lot of people struggle with forgiveness and people that have hurt them in their lives and moving forward in that. And so I said, all right, well, let's try it. And now Live to Forgive is out, and it's been out for 5 years. And it was a hard book to write. I'm glad I wrote it. My dad gave approval for everything that's in that book about him. So he even saw the value of writing a book about our broken relationship, because he knew if it could help someone, it was worth writing. Daryl Strawberry wrote the foreword, as I mentioned, and I'm just so thankful. I'm so proud. I think anything I've ever done in my life as far as work, Live to Forgive is the thing I'm most proud of. I
Yeah.
love ESPN. I love Sports Spectrum, what I'm doing now. I loved my time growing up, and going to WGY, the first radio station I ever worked for in Albany. But Live to Forgive is different. That is a personal narrative story about my relationship with my dad and forgiveness. And it's the work I'm most proud of. And I hope that it continues for years and years to help people on their journey to forgiveness. The second book, I'll be real brief about that. It's almost like if you write a first book, you got to write a second book. I did not want to write another book, but I had so many stories from my time at ESPN. I said, okay, I want to tell those stories, but I don't want it to be a tell-all book about ESPN. And here's all these things that that happen behind the curtain, that exclusive things that nobody knows about. I wasn't trying to put myself in a place where I could just tell these stories and lift myself up and tear down ESPN. That was not the point. But I am very thankful to my time at ESPN, as I said earlier. So the book ended up becoming a leadership book about the leadership lessons that I learned from working at ESPN. And so there's a lot of stories in that book, stories that I haven't shared here, of me hanging out with a lot of famous people like Tony Dungy and Pete Carroll and Drew Brees and Daryl Strawberry and those guys. Those are in the book. But my favorite parts of the book aren't those stories. They're the stories of the everyday people that work in the cafeteria and work in the production department, and people behind the scenes that I got to witness, be around, and learn from. And they were great leaders. And so I got to tell those stories as well in the book. And I'm thankful for that book as well. That's the love letter to ESPN, that book, for me. But I also wrote it in a way where, let's say you're a coach or you're, a person leading a team. It's written in a way where you can go through with your team this book and being a better leader, being a better person, being a better follower of Christ. There's questions at the end of every chapter that you can kind of go through. So it's really written in a way for coaches and other people, pastors, people who lead teams, to be able to say, okay, how can we put on this uniform of leadership and wear it properly every single day by serving others? So those are the two books. Yeah. I do not plan on writing a third book, Jake and Wyatt. I'm never going to tell God I won't do anything, because he'll do whatever he wants. Clearly, I see my life and where I've lived, but I just don't have a good idea at this point to write a third book. Maybe someday. We'll see.
Yeah. Well, I just wonder, how long does it take to write the actual book? So then there's the whole through the publisher, editor. I don't know. How long did that process take?
It takes a long time. I mean, at least I'll say this, with Live to Forgive, from the very first idea of the book, which was June of 2016, hadn't even written the chapters or anything, but the idea of it, we had a book in our hand in January of 2018. So you can see how long it took, a year and a half.
Yeah.
With the Uniform of Leadership, it was more like 2 years. That was The idea for that was July of 2018. The book came out July 25th of 2020. So that was 2-year process. Now, the writing process and the editing is what takes the longest, and that takes a good year. And then it becomes, editing and all the editors going through everything. And then finally they put a release date on it. So it takes 4 or 5 months once the book goes into a publisher to get published. And so there's a lot that goes into it, but it's a couple year process. You can do it quicker if you have people to push you through to do it quicker. Nick Foles won a Super Bowl in 2018 with the Eagles, and that was February, and he had his book out by the end of June. So sometimes if you have somebody helping you write it, you have a publisher that wants to push it through quickly, take advantage, if you will, of the fact that he won a Super Bowl, get it done in 6 months. Most people who I know who've written books, it's usually about an 18-month process to do, in some cases 2 years.
Wow, that is incredible.
Yeah, it takes a while. So it's, you got to really, if you want to ever practice patience, that's the time to practice patience, because I'm a producer for television and radio, and it's like instantaneous. You get a guest, you put them on television, and you do the interview, and it's all done in less than an hour. You produce a podcast. I'll do an interview. Yesterday, I did an interview with a guy who played with the Bills. Got that interview done in 30 minutes, produced it, edited it. Within 2 hours after I taped the interview, it was finished. It hasn't gone out yet. It's not going out for a while, but the whole process of everything is fairly quick. Not with writing a book. You could write a blog in, a half hour, but a book, it takes years to write. It really does.
Wow.
Man.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing.
I highly recommend, if you're going to go into writing a book, first of all, just write it. Don't write it for other people. Write it for yourself, but know that it's a process. It's going to take time.
It is a long process.
All right.
Yeah.
Wyatt, you have any more questions for Jason, or any topics you want to hit?
No,
I guess just kind of a fun one.
Okay.
How far do you think the Mets are going to go in the playoffs?
Oh, Wyatt. You're killing me, Wyatt.
You guys have the best pitcher, though. You had Jacob deGrom.
I think we have a shot. Here's what I'll say. I think the Mets have enough talent to win the World Series.
Yes.
I believe that. But if Jacob deGrom and Max Scherzer do not pitch like Jacob deGrom and Max Scherzer can, and I mean dominance, I don't think they have a shot at going all the way. They have to have those two pitchers specifically not have bad outings. I don't know. I'm sure you guys saw it. The Braves and the Mets played last weekend as we record this. The Mets only needed to win one game, and they probably would have won the division. They got swept. And the Braves faced deGrom, Scherzer, and Chris Bassett, who is their third starter. And the Braves just scored more runs. They hit 3 home runs off deGrom. They think they won 4-2 maybe in that game, 5-2. They hit a couple home runs and timely hits off of Scherzer and won that game 4-2. And the Mets didn't give up a ton of runs. It's not like they were getting blown out 10-0. But those guys were on their B games. And the Mets didn't score enough runs against the Braves pitchers to win. They could do that in the playoffs. But it's very unlikely, if deGrom and Scherzer are on their B games, that the Mets will win those games or even win a series. They have to know that when those two guys are pitching, those are wins. And then you figure out if you can win the other games, right? But you got a shot if you got those two shutdown pitchers on their game. Obviously, their offense needs to hit. They've had some slumps this year. But guys, I look at it like this. I don't even know if they'll beat the Padres, because the Padres got some really good players, some good pitchers, and it's a short series. Anything can happen in 3 games.
Yeah.
But the Mets just won 101 games. In my lifetime, 49 years of being alive, the Mets, even before I was born, the Mets only won more than 101 games once. And it was that 1986 year with Darryl Strawberry, when they won 108 games. Every other year, by the way, it's only their other World Series besides 1969. But in 1969, they won 100 games. In 1988, when they got to the NLCS, they won 100 games. They never won 100 games otherwise. So to me, obviously, I want the Mets to go far. I usually temper my expectations because they've disappointed me a lot. but they just won 101 games. So I'm trying to celebrate the fact that it was a great season, whether or not they win the World Series or even get to the World Series, because they just did something that just doesn't happen if you're a Mets fan that often. First time that they've won 100 games since 1988. I was 14 years old. I'm 49. It's been a while. You know what I'm saying, guys? It's been a while. 35 years, 34 years. So I'm just trying to be thankful and appreciate how good they have been this year, because it was a special year. But that NL is so loaded. That National League is, the Cardinals are good enough. The Padres are good enough. The Phillies, who knows if they could get hot, but they're good enough. The Braves are ridiculously good. And so are the Dodgers, who are the most stacked team in baseball. So I don't know if you get out of that National League, whatever team you are, you had an amazing season, because the American League, I think, other than the Yankees, but really the Astros, those other teams, I think they have capability of winning, but they're not as top heavy. Cleveland and Seattle and Toronto and those teams. But in the National League, all 6 of those teams to me are stacked and have a shot.
If the Yankees and the Astros don't make the World Series, they choked. I mean,
completely agree.
And I wanted to say this at the end, so you'd stay on, but I'm a Yankees fan, so
okay, that's all right. I only root for your team to lose every single night, but otherwise, I'm good, man. I'm good. I don't have. Listen, what Aaron Judge just did was incredible. It was incredible.
Right? It's just like
insane.
Unbelievable.
I can't believe he did that.
Unbelievable. I don't have any problem with the Yankees in the sense of, like, I don't hate them. They're in the American League. But I certainly want the Mets to beat them every time they play them. And we split this year. So, we each got 2 games. We'll be okay.
And I will say, as a Yankees fan, I would tune in to Mets games when DeGrom or Scherzer was pitching, because it's like they're the best pitchers.
That's right.
It's like,
that's right. Now they're also older, and that's Scherzer's pitching game 1 on Friday, and he's going to have to be 7 innings, 1 run.
Yeah,
has to, maybe 2 runs if he gets lucky. If the Mets can somehow score 3. But this is going to be one of those games where if DeGrom or Scherzer, like I said, allow 3 runs or more, which they did against the Braves, they're not going to win those games, I don't think. Unless the Mets bats just get so hot that, nobody can stop them. But the Mets offense is good, but they need their pitching to be great. That's what they built this team around, was Scherzer, DeGrom, Bassett, some veterans, their veteran bullpen. Edwin Diaz is lights out if you can get to him. But we'll see. I like the Mets' chances, but I don't know. I'm cautiously optimistic, but I'm always set up for disappointment, Wyatt.
Yeah, I mean, but people don't realize, like, baseball is not like football or basketball. It's hard to hit a baseball. Like,
not only that, anybody can beat anybody in baseball.
Yeah, it's like anything.
Anybody. That's why I say it's top heavy. But if you told me the Phillies and the Mariners would make it to the World Series, I'd probably say you're out of your mind. But both those teams are capable enough to win a couple series and get that far. They probably won't, because usually the cream rises to the top, but not always.
Yeah.
The Braves weren't the best team last year. The Dodgers were, but the Braves beat the Dodgers.
Yeah, they won.
And they won the World Series. And Houston probably was better than the Braves when you're going into the World Series, and Houston lost. So the best team doesn't always win.
No.
And that's why I'm hanging my hat on just a little bit of hope with the Mets. That they're not the best team, but they have a good enough team. Much like 2015, when they went to the World Series against the Royals, they weren't the best team, but they had just enough good pitching and timely hitting, Daniel Murphy, to get them through. So we'll see.
Yeah.
Anyways, guys, thanks for having me.
Yeah,
this is awesome.
Thanks for joining us, sharing us about your faith, your story, your books, and just being vulnerable with us. We really do appreciate it.
Yeah,
absolutely, Jake and Wyatt. Thanks, buddy. Great to talk to both of you guys, and let's do it again soon.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Wow, what a great episode with Jason Romano from Sports Spectrum. 17 years at ESPN, and then took a leap of faith and went to Sports Spectrum, where he interviews guests about faith, the relationship with Christ, now sports, and intercede. And that was just really cool. I loved getting to know how he does that and the details of it. And then also his book, Live to Forgive. That was really cool. Wyatt, how he went into detail of how he did it and how he got his dad's permission and everything he did. He was talking about his dad and growing up and everything that he wrote his dad gave him the thumbs up. So that was really cool and really awesome how he shared that with us.
Yeah, like going through adversity like that, you never know how that can affect someone. And he just kept going throughout his life. Like you said, he still loved his dad, even though it was tough at times. But he still lived out his dreams of working at ESPN, now working at Sports Spectrum. It's really motivational and inspiring. So
yeah,
I loved how he met his hero, Daryl Strawberry, and they didn't even talk about like baseball or just sports. It was just about like life in general and their faith, and they really connected through that. And I think that really showed that, yeah, we're the three of us, we're really crazy sports fans, but there's more to life than just sports that when you can connect with people. So
yeah, Daryl just took a genuine interest in Jason. Put the sports aside, put whatever aside. He just took a genuine interest in the person who Jason was.
yeah, and he cannot because he's Daryl Strawberry.
Yeah,
Hall of Fame, just one of the best baseball players there is out there. But he was just like Jason, just a nice guy, and just wanted to, share his story. So
yeah, definitely.
all right, so let's conclude this episode of Be Unexpected. If you'd like to be on our show, please email us at beunexpected100@gmail.com. You can also watch our podcast on YouTube, on my YouTube channel, Life with Wyatt Spalding, and you can listen to this on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Thanks for watching and listening to Be Unexpected. See ya.